All right. All right. Okay. All G. All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm David. I'm not sure what number workshop this is. So workshop N, I guess. So I'm going to be presenting on how to win a finals, which is a bit more of an abstract topic than like geopolitics of Iran or something. 6 of 7. Very nice. Auspicious, actually. So I'm going to be presenting on how to win a final. So I'll give a chat a little bit about it. I guess I'll build a bit of ethos first, just to convince all of you that like I have an appreciable amount of experience for doing finals. So I've lost the world finals twice, which is more than most people. And to show that I learned the third time around, they finally let me win out of pity. I've been to a bunch of other finals. I think I won Asians 4 times, depending on how you count like the format. And then I won Oxford IV and LSE Open, but I think I never won Cambridge IV, which I'll never get to do because I'm not allowed to as a Cambridge student. Yeah. Oh, and I won Australs also. So I have like some experience with getting to finals. And I think it's one of those things where like you have to develop a bit of a taste for it. One of the students in the WUDC fellowship, which is this training program we started this year, wrote a pretty good like capstone project, which was about like the importance of taste. Like you can get really good at like rigorously building arguments, and like having a really well built foundation. But if you don't have like that taste, you might build an argument that is very well built and even like very well framed, but it will just be the wrong argument to do. And this applies not just to arguments, but just to strategies, to how you comport yourself in around like the overall demeanor you take towards it. And it's a bit of a shame to like lose because you don't have that sense, right? You don't have the taste for, when like the frisson is in the air, when it's your chance to turn this into a winning case rather than just a normal case in the final. So I'm going to chat about like my experiences with finals. So I'll first argue like why this is different and why you should spend some time deliberately practicing getting good at final speeches. And then I'll give some practical tips on how you do that. And then we'll do like some examples. So like story time, for like certain tournaments. That would also be a good point to ask questions. My request is that if you have a question, the sort of house rules are like just post it in the chat as soon as you think of it so that I have more time to formulate a really good answer. Yeah, I just came from like my thesis presentation, so I'm kind of like in a presentation giving mood right now. So I'm really happy to answer any questions. My request would be that when we get to the point where we're like I'm discussing examples, like I'll probably stop sharing the PowerPoint and then we can all turn on our cameras so that like we're like actually in a discussion instead of me just yapping to the screen. Okay, so let's get started. So let's first get on with the discussion. So you can consider this the start. So like 3 minutes in. So people don't really spend that much time contemplating a final. They focus most of their time on getting to the final and in general getting better at debating. But while there are many things that are cross-applicable from rounds in general to rounds in the final, there are some tips you don't really get to practice until you reach that final. So in this lecture, I'm first going to formulate the argument that a final is different substantially from a normal round and thus demands different tactical and strategic considerations, and building your speech, giving the speech, and then afterwards processing it. Secondly, then, from those characteristics, I'm going to derive some practical tips to improve your performance in the finals. And then I'm going to thirdly work through some examples where these tips might be useful. The disclaimer for this presentation is obviously this should improve your chances relative to the other 3 teams. But I cannot guarantee you will win of every final you are in. First of all, because that's not a realistic goal to aim for. And second of all, because you might apply the advice wrong. Or maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe the meta has moved on from the ramblings of me and I'm now too old to give advice. And thirdly is if two of you who have watched this lecture are on opposite teams in the final, then only one of you can win. And that's just how competition is. So you shouldn't come away from this expecting to win nationals the moment you finish this lecture, but you should instead have like a mindset and like a skill set ready so that when you do reach the finals, you know what to do. You're not like stunned by the moment and blinded by the bright lights. If that's all good with everybody, could I just have like people type like a 1 in the chat, like the number 1, to make sure that you're all still paying attention? Yes, this is my version of a CAPTCHA. So far, it's not cheap yet to do inference on audio data. So I'll just ask people to type in 1. Very, very good. So as the lecture goes on, I'm going to ask more and more complex mathematical expressions. Okay, so let's get started. So what is a final? So a final, I argue, has 3 characteristics that differentiate it from a normal round. The first is that it's the most important round. Secondly is that it's evaluated differently. It's judged differently from a regular in-round. And thirdly is that these rounds are the hardest to practice. So from these characteristics, you can already pretty reasonably infer that you will debate differently, you'll be judged differently, and you will have a different level of comfort with the finals versus any other round. I now develop these premises. So first point, sorry, that says the most important round. Yep. So the most important round should, from this follows 3 things that are reasonably likely. First is that it should have the best teams in the tournament. Maybe it won't have like from break 1, 2, 3, 4, but it will have, the best teams like with like some reasonable approximation. So like versus your random prelim round, this round should be much better, right? It might be like slightly better, maybe like a little bit worse than the semis, but it is expected that by this point you are in a top room or some equivalent of the top room. This has some natural implications. The first thing is that obviously you cannot get away with basic mistakes and errors. These will be capitalized on by other teams. And secondly is that you can't assume they'll take bad arguments. They'll be idiots about it. Rather, you should anticipate like a collapse, but you should not expect it. Like you should be prepared for a team to fail and for you to take their spot. But you should not come into it expecting that a team will be worse than you, even if they broke lower than you, even if their speaks were much lower than yours, as revealed by the break. They reached the final, same as you. And so at this point in the audience's eyes, you're at least standing on the same ground. You might reach different heights, but all of you have the chance to win that round. So this round should have the best teams in the tournament. And as a natural consequence, the quality of the round will be much higher. It will just generally be a more difficult round. The second characteristic from it being the most important round is that these rounds tend to have bigger, more dramatic motions. You will have, every now and then an edge score that will set like a fairly moderate economic motion or some like historical debate that's not really that interesting. But typically finals are for big philo, big tech ideas. Because these are, AdScore will generally try to cater to what an audience would like to listen to. Maybe they've brought some foreign dignitaries to watch the final. This would be the round that makes the headline, so they want something that's interesting. If you just scan through finals rounds of major tournaments, they've ranged from like over the top, very philosophical, to like very hypothetical. What if aliens were real? What if your mom was a phone? That type of thing. And so these big dramatic motions, and they tend to be quite different from what teams practice in prelim rounds and what you end up debating for the majority of rounds in the tournament. So it will be characterized by a different type of debate in addition to already being a fairly tough round. The third and final thing about it being the most important round is that this is where the lights shine brightest, which means if you're someone who's new to finals, your feet will shake, your voice will quiver, and your time management might be worse. You should expect yourself to be at a different level already, in the sense that you will be performing worse on average than when you're very calm and very relaxed. Now, there are some people who get better under extreme pressure, like when the lights get bright, they get better. But this is not a natural human reaction to most things. It's very natural for you to make more cautious claims, for you to be more afraid, and for you to not take the chance to shine when the lights are shined on you. So These three things impose a heavy and lopsided burden on you as a team entering into this final. So I'm still just making the argument that a final is different and should be practiced for differently. So I'll discuss how to address sort of these problems in a little bit. But for now, just be settled with the fact that a final, at minimum, is like top room pro max, right? Like you should expect this round to be harder than other rounds. And so far, I feel like I've made a fairly uncontroversial argument. There are, of course, many famous finals where like one team runs everyone else over, and it's like, sort of a steamroll, but like by and large, finals will be more competitive than the average round one. Okay, if everybody has understood so far and they don't have any questions, then my next request for you to put in the chat is some expression that equals 0 that is not just the number 0. So that would be like 1 minus 1 equals 0. Or nothingness, that works too. Okay, yeah, people are refreshing themselves on the math. E to the power of 0 minus 1. Yeah, my during the presentations, what a couple of my buddies and I were doing is we would get like 4 integers and then we'd have to like manipulate them to get 24. It'll be like a pretty fun way to pass a time at an airport. But it's kind of a loser game, to be honest. But I find it pretty fun. Okay, thank you, everybody. Note that it will only get harder from this point on. So the most important round. The next thing you should expect is that a finals round will be judged differently. So it's not just that the demands on the debater will be higher, but that the judge expectations will be slightly different. This difference can mean very little in the sense that some rounds will be still very technically judged. Like, for example, in the recent KCL Open, I felt that the finals judging came to the very technically correct decision, even if it might not have been like the most finalsy, most like bombastic speech. In the end, I felt it was a technically correct call, right? So the technicality of judging will vary, but judge expectations will, on average, be somewhat different from a normal prelim round. So here I articulate what their differences are. The first is that in theory, a final should have the best judges. At minimum, they should be better than the judges you've been getting on average throughout the tournament. There might be some exceptions where the tournament has a small judge pool, and this judge pool is primarily composed of one institution, and there's someone from that institution in the finals. But other than this, you should generally expect that the judges in that final will be better than the judges you've been getting throughout the course of this tournament. So you should expect that they will evaluate arguments somewhat more fairly, and that you shouldn't have to use any dark arts to misrepresent another opponent. You might also expect that another opponent's attempts to misrep you might be less successful. The second thing is that the the judging expectations are a bit different because there's also the peer pressure and the finals aura. This is the most important round after all, and so all the storylines will be pressing on them. Judges will have heard errantly opinions about rep, about other teams. Obviously, they will endeavor as much as they can to avoid making judgments on that basis, but it's just the type of thing where humans get caught up in the swell of the moment. The crowd cheers, it's loud, all you can hear is the crowd cheers. Even if the response wasn't that good, if it was funny and the crowd laughs, you're cooked, right? So there is some element of showmanship that you have to play along with, because in the end, debating can be a science, it can be an art, but it is also a performance. And so you will have to play up to the role that the finals demands of you. So at some point, the judge expectations will be partially skewed by the willingness of the crowd to accept it and your overall conduct throughout the tournament. Like I have seen some people get knocked out, even though I thought their performance was pretty all right, because they were just really mean throughout the tournament. People took note of that, and then by the time they reached the finals, like people already didn't like them very much. So they just didn't get a fair shot in the Delib, which is like, whether you call it karma or like unfair by the rules of debate, that's up to you. But personally, I think for all of you here in the audience, you don't have to take any chances. So don't leave it up to luck. The third thing would be, finals also tend to have the longest deliberation time. This can either be with the blessing of the conveners or against the blessing of the conveners, but usually this will be very long. It'll be longer than the 15 minutes or however many minutes that judges normally get to deliberate over a final. Maybe it's like a UADC, in which case everybody just comes to their own decision and they vote. But for consensus finals, the judging difference is rather different. It's rather large because there's a lot more time to finally go through an argument, which will have some natural implications on the types of things you can run. Like if you have an extension in closing opposition, but it's not very clear, you can expect that if you're in contention for the win, that panel will closely look through your extension and compare it to their opening to see how it compares and how much of it is novel. Like I've lost a final where the audience was in agreement that I had the impression that I was winning really strongly and by a lot. Then the panel was like, oh, but opening government gave some arguments that opening opposition already responded to because we were closing opposition. And then the panel discussion went on for long enough that by the end of this, and I kind of do agree, that closing opposition had taken a lot of material already from opening. And so there was so much of it that wasn't reminiscent. But because opening government beat opening opposition, the team that was originally third ended up getting the first. And it's just like, it's on you to be as clear as possible so that judges in deliberation don't have a hard time advocating for you. So you shouldn't be trying to win just the debate that happens on stage, but you should be trying to win the meta debate that happens afterwards when the judges are re-articulating your arguments and they're trying to prove that these arguments are novel and they can place where their contribution is in the debate. They can say, oh, opening government wasn't responded to. Why? Because the deputy prime minister made it really clear what went unengaged in the opening exchange between PM and LO, so we can assess what was fair for DLO to have ignored and what we should have expected them to respond to. So the judge expectations are different. There's some element of it that's like, oh, this is just the best round, and so you should expect a very high caliber of judging. But there's also some amount of it that's like the showmanship, the crowd work, and just the natural expectations of being the last round of the day. Okay, again, we're still at the second premise of the first point I'm trying to make, which is really just finals are different, and so you should treat them accordingly. If you all are with me so far and you still understand the point I'm trying to make, then if you could please give me any expression that uses division. In the chat, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is not a math test, it's just a lecture, but I am making sure that your brains are still thinking. So the final thing that makes it different is that a finals is hard to practice. So you should expect yourself to be less familiar with the final setting than with other things. And so there are things that might catch you off guard about it that you didn't expect to even notice or care, like how to project your voice, what to do if people are talking during your speech and they're not listening to you. How do you make yourself heard when you're so small? If you're used to speaking in small classrooms, it's easy to fill up and take up space and give an imposing style of speech because you're taking up a lot of space on the podium. You look large relative to it. But when you're so small in an audience and you're speaking to a huge room, you find that your normal tone of voice, your speed of speaking, they don't work. It sounds weird with the echo. You have a hard time using the mic. Like you just don't look as big when you stretch out your arms and you point to the opposition. So there will be a lot of different traits and characteristics about speaking in a final. Here I articulate what makes them different. Oops. The first thing that's different is that your level of tiredness should be at its peak. So you should have fought through maybe one prelim round. You should have the fatigue of the previous prelim rounds in the last day or the previous day, if it's the Worlds, and maybe the last 3 days. You should have fought through all of the elimination rounds to get here. And those should be also pretty high caliber rounds where then you have the anxiousness building up, waiting for the decision to be announced and convening. Then it's announced, and then you're like, okay, I've got the rush. I've got 10 minutes to get feedback from the judges, and then straight off to the final. So your level of tiredness, which which will naturally flow down to how well you choose your arguments, how disciplined you are in prep time, how unkempt and disheveled you look. All of these things flow from your state. You might be the best debater in the world when you're fresh, but if you have really poor stamina, you will soon come to realize that the finals is not a sprint. It is the last 100 miles of the marathon you are just about to finish. So your level of tiredness and the way you conduct yourself will definitely be different from round one to the end of the tournament at the final. So that's the first thing. Your level of tiredness will differ your performance. Secondly, is that it's hard to get feedback on a final. So even if you were in finals before, typically you will go out drinking, especially if you won, especially if you lost also. So it's hard to get feedback from judges. So if you debate and you have some serious systemic error in how you approach a final, it will be hard to gather evidence for that based other than just the vibes that other people in the audience or maybe your teammate might give you. So it's hard to get feedback, and the natural setting of debate does not lend itself well to getting feedback after a final. Typically then, because you go to announce you can't obviously ask the judges for feedback until the result is announced, which is the very end of the tournament and the closing ceremony. You might be lucky if you're like in an ABP or something where it's all in the same resort, and then you just ask the judges in the pool afterwards. But typically you're not so lucky. And also those expenses are somewhat expensive those tournaments are somewhat expensive to go to. So it's hard to get feedback, and it's hard because if you think about it in like machine learning terms, this is the only reward signal you get, right? You get a very unnuanced signal of if you won or if you lost. And other than that, if you want to know the nuance or the material substance of how you perform, you would have to ask the judges, which is kind of embarrassing. So that's the second thing. It's hard to get feedback. The third and final thing is how you debate when there are high stakes. This cannot be replicated in training. Like unless you're like really treating each training as if you're like Michael Jordan and this is like the Western Conference Finals or the Eastern Conference Finals, you're not going to debate the same way. So, you might try to get your adrenaline high and whatever, but this is the purpose of prep comps, to prepare you for those high pressure settings by emulating something that also has stakes, albeit at a lower scale. So when you reach a major finals for the first time, or a national finals for the first time, or even a world finals for the first time, the adrenaline, the cortisol in your body will be at an all-time high, right? You will just, it will strike you in a way that you've never been struck before. And so the stakes have to be real, which is why it's hard to practice in a setting that just doesn't have those stakes. You can try to emulate other features of it, like having a good quality partner and having really good teams and good judges. But when it comes down to it, you cannot manufacture the bright lights, which means you have to put yourselves in these situations as much as possible. So it's hard to practice. You should expect that in many cases, finals are like a sui generis. Like they're hard to come by. They're usually one of one. And they're definitely not something you can reliably like chance across. Like you just have to deliberately look for them. So that's the third premise. Basically, finals are hard to practice. So you should expect yourself to be worse on average, even if you debate the same, and even if you're judged the same. You should just also expect the foundational skills you have to work with to be somewhat more deficient in a final setting than in an average preliminary round. Okay, if people have understood me so far, then could they type out their favorite number in words? Okay, you've got a classic 69. Okay. Fair enough. You don't have to have a favorite number. I'm just making sure you're listening. Okay, so we've established now that a finals is different, right? You have to, it's hard, it's important, it's judged differently, and it's tough to practice. So what does this mean for you guys? So first thing is, let's break it down into phrases. What should you do before the finals? The first is it should be done long before the finals. You should have good, diligent foundation. That means that you should already know how to argue, how to respond, how to frame. You should not have any major deficiencies in building an argument from step A to step B to step C. You should have a pretty broad foundation of of knowledge to work on, like what's going on in the world right now, what countries exist, how supply and demand works. Like these things are relatively basic, but you shouldn't have any major gaps in them, which means before all of this has happened, you should have done your job as a normal debater before you even make the finals, which is just not have any major weaknesses. Your finals run can easily be derailed by forgetting to rebut or missing a crucial link in an argument that your closing will take from you, so on and so forth. So before the finals even happens, you should be reading up on basic things. Here are some things you should always read up on before the finals and even the tournament starts. First, the country that the tournament is in. Secondly, the tournament, the country. Sorry, you should read up on the country that the tournament is in. Secondly, you should read up on the countries that the ad score are from in recent events. Thirdly, you should read up on like what things are just generally happening in the world. Like, oh, Meta just bought Scale AI, or oh, there's currently a conflict going on, and like funding is being sent to Israel by the United States or whatever. So these things, you should have a good, diligent foundation. You should have done the vast majority of work beforehand. The way you want to think about it is you spend 3 hours reading on a specific topic to get maybe 10 seconds in a speech. That should be about the conversion rate that you're thinking about, and you should try to read with how you would use it in a debate in mind. So have good, diligent foundation. Secondly is, let's say you're about to hear the motion, you're like maybe 10 minutes away from it, you've just seen the draw. Review what you've learned so far in the course of the tournament. This is a very important learning, which is that the debater you are by the finals should absolutely shellac the debater you were in round one. You should get better. You should fine tune on what you've heard so far in feedback. You should have a better sense of the meta on the ground. What proportion of argument to framing to responses are judges looking for? Have judges been telling you, I didn't believe this, you should have said more on this? So maybe instead of 3 premises, you run like 4 premises and you prove them better. So ask yourself, like, is the current base model of myself and my debating, is it updated as it can be? What have I learned so far in the course of the tournament? How can I use these learnings in the speech I'm going to give? So pay attention. When judges tell you, I thought that you didn't break enough deadlocks, there's no excuse for you to receive the same comment in the final, and especially in rounds succeeding that. So if you've heard something already, you should implement it, especially if that same judge is on the panel, or especially if a team that you lost to on that basis is on that final, right? There have been many tournaments where if I was in round 1 and you put me in the final, I would not have won that final. A very good example of this is Madrid, right? We steamroll Madrid Worlds. We steamroll round 1 to round 6, and then round 7, 8, 9, we start like we get hit by teams that argue even more than us. So Toby and I were getting away in the first few rounds with running a lot of arguments and having a lot of very diffuse framing that just sort of impacts these arguments in general. And then we would get caught by teams that were either more mechanistically spread than us, which means they could run more things more efficiently with better English, or they were very, very focused on a pinpoint. This is the one thing that we care about in this debate. And so we realized that we had to condense our material even more, which is the attitude we brought into break rounds. And that attitude helped us like really bridge the gap from where we were to where we needed to be to eventually win the championship, which was just run the right amount of arguments. This is a question I get asked a lot. When do you know what the right amount to argue is? When do you know what the right amount to say something is before you've proven it? How do you know the right amount of response to give something? You will have a sense for it, but only after you've gone through the rounds in the tournament and realize when the judges say, this is too much, this is too little, you have to adjust so that you get the just right. So that's the second thing. Review what you've learned so far in the tournament. Final piece of advice I give before the finals is you have to get psyched. One lesson I learned back in high school was that you can really beat anybody. Debating is one of those sports where it doesn't matter what, like, you know, who you were before, what you won before. If you give a 74 speech, that's a 74. And somebody who gives a better speech will win over you. That's how it should be. And so you just leave it all on the paint. Basically, what I'm saying is, if you give a speech that's better, then you should win. And it's in you to give a speech that's better. You have the words already. The English exists. The alphabet is there to be combined for you to use. You don't have to discover a new letter or discover a new word. So all you have to do is find that combination of words, which you can do. That's something that you verifiably can do. So get psyched about it. Get psyched that you can beat anybody, and you have to debate them with the arrogance of somebody that believes they can beat them. That's just how it should be. And if you don't do that in a finals, judges will notice you're debating timidly. The audience will notice you don't believe in yourself. And there's certainly no reason for anybody in a panel discussion that's as heated as a finals one to advocate for a team that doesn't even believe they should win. So you have to get psyched. In a regional tournament, Luzon InterVarsity, so like in the Philippines, which is it's a pretty big tournament in the Philippines. I think it might be the biggest regional tournament that's not a nationals in the Philippines. I was debating with Miko, right? So Miko was my partner, and like we hadn't done all that well in prelims. I think we even lost to like a high school Toby, which was pretty depressing for us because I think we had done pretty well in like other tournaments before, and I think we were just like, dang, are we like cooked? Are we washed up? We were losing. We were taking a bunch of losses we felt we shouldn't. We felt we shouldn't be taking, or like we weren't impressing ourselves as much as we should be. So right before the final, Miko was like, hey, there's this montage from my favorite like League of Legends team or whatever. No, not his favorite. One of my favorite League of Legends teams, where they're like, oh, they thought we couldn't do this, but like watch us. There's so much joy in being like an underdog. And so you listen to whatever you need to get yourself psyched up for a final. Some people like to listen to UK drill music. Some people like to eat a really good meal. One of my very good friends who ended up being an Asian champion, he had this thing where he would pee in the same bathroom he first peed in for that tournament every time he needed to pee, so that he would never lose the good luck of that first piss. And do what you gotta do. Use whatever superstitions you gotta leverage. If you have to avoid listening to Disney songs the entire tournament to win that tournament, then do it. If you have to, what I like to do is I like to like take a really good shower, just like absolutely freezing cold, like just like destroy my nerves on my skin, because it makes you feel like you're just like fresh into the world again, and like you're a new debater. Even if you're physically tired, if you're spiritually renewed, you can give any speech you need to. So get psyched, because if you give a debate speech that's afraid, if you give a debate speech that's not, I think I can win this final, why would anybody else think you can win this final? So that's before the final. So have a good foundation, which is like, weeks before the final. Then review what you've learned so far, which is maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes before the final. And then get psyched, which is like, 1 to 2 minutes before prep should start. Yes, that's true. A monkey with a keyboard can type out Shakespeare. You can also make a good speech. Ideally, you teach the monkey Shakespeare. So, which is not that hard to do because you guys are humans. So frankly, I think it's not unreasonable to expect you guys to give good speeches. So that's what it should be like before the finals. Luzon InterVarsity, I don't know. I think it might be 2018 or 2019. I just remember it was the finals on like transportation. So like we should heavily tax luxury cars or something, or just cars in Manila. Yeah. Okay. So if you all understand so far, could you please give me your favorite number, your favorite prime number? Just any number that's a prime number. One's not a prime number. Sorry, buddy. Okay, the rest of these are prime numbers. People are being very conservative with their suggestions. Okay, so that's before the finals. That's what you should be doing before the finals. Now I wanna, now less is more actually, except when more is more. Sometimes, so during the finals, you have to also change how you have to switch up how you debate, if you didn't already debate like this. So what are some tips I have? The first tip I have is, since the finals, it's a finals with big dramatic motions, it's a finals with the brightest lights, you should debate for first. In British parliamentary, you can win a tournament by only getting first once. You can take seconds, and if it's an average break size for the tournament, then being on straights should land you a pretty safe break. To advance in a break round, you only have to get one of the top two spots. So you only have to get the first in the final round to win the tournament. So debate for first. There's nothing to gain by debating for second unless you're one of those weird tournaments where they give, prizes for first, prizes for second, prizes for third, whatever. But like for the vast majority of tournaments, there's really no difference between second and fourth. So debate for first. If it's the choice between running an argument that you don't think you can, which has a higher chance of making you win, versus an argument you know for sure you can run, but you know for sure won't make you win, just pick the one that will have a higher chance of making you win the debate. Stretch your skills to the limit. If you feel there's a concept that's too complicated to express, push yourself to the limit in simplifying it and expressing it more elegantly and more eloquently. So debate for first. If you're in closing and you have a rogue extension and then you have a nice extension, if you can run both, run the rogue one first so that it's more central. So during a finals, you want to debate for the only spot that matters. There's no more points. There's only the final speech you feel you can give and the adoration of the audience. If you do end up getting first, then congratulations. There are some people's speeches who got more remembered than the actual winners of that final. Like, for example, Sheng Wu. He didn't win that world final, but he gave such a good speech and gave such a clever case that people thought that he actually did win. Or people remember his speech more than the speech of closing opposition in I think it was Sydney. This has happened quite a few times. Like some people still talk about closing opposition in that Mexico 2018 finals about like the abyss and the fear of death, more than they do the relatively technical principled cases of opening, both opening teams, which I did think were pretty good, but they definitely weren't as bombastic. So debate for first. You're arguing for the spot of best in the tournament, then you have to actually argue like you can be the best. So don't argue timidly, make brave claims, etc. That's the first thing. The second thing is you want to be extremely clear. Why? Because again, like I said, debating is not just about winning the round that happened, like in the platonic ideal of the round. Rather, you are trying to win the meta debate that happens after the round is done, which is when the judges go into the deliberation room, discuss for an hour, like what happened, like what happens in many finals around the world. Like a good example is the WUDC 2024 final. So I was chair of the Open Final, and what happened was after the final was done, which took about an hour, we took another hour in a separate ballroom, and we basically divided into battle lines, basically argued, okay, should closing government be in? No. Yes. No. Yes. Should opening government be in? Okay, the qualifying question is, should they beat opening opposition? No. Yes. No. Yes. No. 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 Okay, so they don't beat opening opposition. And then blah, 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 blah. So, but the thing is, their motion is not the same as the motion in the finals. Their motion is using the arguments and rebuttals you gave in your final speeches as premises and analysis. They are using you guys' speeches as the motion. So be extremely clear. If you're in closing and you cannot articulate your extension to have a clear, novel, one-liner, what does my extension do? What does it change in the debate? Why is it new? You do not have an extension. At that point, if you don't have like a good one-liner explanation of what your case is, you do not have a case. Similarly, for opening, if you cannot explain why your case is important in the absolute, like you've forgotten to weigh, or if you cannot give a straight line, premise A, link B, conclusion C, explanation of your case, that is, it's too complicated, then you've just lost, right? Like it will just not stand the test of time. You'll get vibe checked out of the round by closing, and the judges will find it too hard to draw intuitive premises. So you should be extremely clear. Pick straight line cases that are easy and withstand the test of long, protracted judge deliberation. Further, I would even suggest that you want to maximize your parallel benefits. That is, if you have a claim that's already pretty easy to believe, try and make the most of it. So if your conclusion is, oh, people have less money, then maybe one impact of that conclusion could be people have less money, therefore they can't send their kids to school. Their long-term future goals are harder to achieve, which makes it harder for them to self-actualize. And maybe you could also say, and also in times of crisis, it's harder for them to rebuild a house that had a tree fall on it because of a natural disaster. It's hard for them to have the credit to take out a loan in case they need to buy a car to get to work. And if they don't, they get fired from their job. So be extremely clear and try to make the most of what you already have that's clear. Weaponize what your partner said that was clear and that came out and was unresponded to. So during the finals itself, you have to be optimizing for how the judge receives it rather than how you think the debate in the ideal should be played. Because maybe you're right that your debate is the right debate, but you might not see it the same way that the judge does. Debate is in the end a game of Chinese telephone. You're transmitting an idea that you formulated in your head to the imperfect medium of your speech, which will be received through the imperfect medium of the judge's listening, and then captured through their notes, which the judge will then read again, so another imperfect transmission, and then explain that in a panel deliberation, which will go through their mouth and will also be an imperfect transmission of your case. So throughout all this, you have to expect that the message you provide will be extremely degraded, or you should be the greatest, clearest speaker of all time. Either of these outcomes is acceptable to me as your lecturer, but you have to pick one of them. So be clear, even to the slight expense of the analytical depth of your case, even if you have to give another example instead of adding like a third argument. Focus on having something that's really concrete, really good, really easy to understand. Thirdly, try to have a sense for pivots. So my recommendation is, once you get up there, the air is different. You can definitely get a sense for what the audience responds to, what the judges respond to. If a judge is falling asleep, that's obviously a bad thing. But the pivots you want to hold onto are the ones that are really make you feel like the round is in your hands. They might have said all sorts of things before, and all sorts of things might have happened in the debate. But if you feel like there's a chance for you to get a highlight, a chance for you to like turn a stray thought that you thought about in your speech to something that's really good, trust it. Your instincts typically are better than your conscious thought because your instincts are like receiving lots of subconscious information that you don't have the mental bandwidth to think about actively. If you're getting the impression that judges are not listening during your first argument, conclude it quickly and move on to your second one. You have to be adaptable to the round itself because, like I said, it's really hard to practice a final, right? It's really hard to get used to it. So you can't always prepare for everything that happens. Sometimes you have to make adjustments on the fly, which will typically be for the better. I've usually preferred cases that I thought of just before coming up to the podium than the case we spent 15 minutes preparing, because that first case that was adaptable and on the fly was immediately succeeding an argument that had a clear gap that would allow me to enter the debate with force. So a good example of this would be in another final. So I think it was Bea Quizon who raised the POI to me, and the motion was like allow parents to like genetically edit their children's personality or something like that, and then like I was giving an argument that this was sort of like it's really hard to like get out of addiction to gambling or whatever because you might have a genetically addictive personality. And so if you're a parent, you would want your child to be braver, to have more willpower, to be more confident, etc. And then Bea Quizon, I think, it's like thinking about how her case would be perceived in the round, POIs, and it's like, well, that's typically doable in status quo, right? Like your dad can go through therapy or whatever. And then I realized that there was a pivot. There was a moment where the audience were like, yeah, this POI makes a point. Like this, you're not actually arguing something that's very, very mutually exclusive. So I realized there was a pivot in the round. It was an opportunity to make the case more mutually exclusive rather than flub a response to the POI. So having a sense for the pivot, what I instead did was I just stopped looking at my notes and I moved from the podium and I looked at the audience as I was sitting down on the steps because it was a stage and then there were steps coming down from the stage into the audience. This was in Makiling Garden in UP Los Baños. And I was talking to the audience, and I was basically like, imagine asking your alcoholic dad, like, going to therapy, like, imagine having asked them to go through that struggle of relapsing again and again. Imagine the withdrawal pains, something along those lines. And I was like, the point is that the current status quo of asking to change yourself is a form of violence, is a form of slavery that you're imposing on yourself. So what makes this form of biological genetic slavery any different? In fact, it's better because you don't feel the pain. So it was one of those opportunities where a round will offer itself up to you and you have to grab it. There are many, many examples like this. Another good example I would put to you is in the round, right, where of like if Euros finals, that one Euros finals about aliens, and I think there was a really good exchange, a really good tactical exchange, but between opening government and opening opposition. But I think as opening opposition, as the opening exchange was ending, I think there was the impression that there could still be a really good practical argument about utility and about having more lives and about living good lives that could still come out from closing. So the deputy leader of opposition speech, which I felt was the best speech in that round, gave a really, really good explanation for why the metric of debate should be total suffering and total disutility rather than net utility, net suffering. And that ended up being very relevant because it directly melded into the case that succeeded it, which was about net utility. So it ended up winning them the debate because they had a very well-framed, well-defended case. The pivot came at opening where they just suddenly had the sense, this is what I should be arguing. Obviously, I'm reading a lot into what their mental state could be. For all I know, this could have been what they were thinking from the very beginning. But it's just one of those things where you have to respond to the demands of the round. You notice that there's a gap in opening that closing will take up. You have to fill that gap before they can so that you can try and keep your spot as beating over both government teams as opening opposition. So have a sense for pivots. These things are very hard to articulate, but once you've just debated enough, you'll have a sense. If I answer this question correctly, I will win this round. If you give the right quote to start your speech, you will win this round. You just have to find it. So that's the second piece of advice. During the finals, you want to have a sense for these pivots. You want to have a sense for, what the world is paying attention to, right? Another good example of this, not a final. Sorry, I'm mostly talking about rounds I've been in because, I was there, so I remember it. Another good example of this was like closing government in Madrid quarterfinals. They give like really good analytical points on like agriculture that are pretty dense, like on currency, and they're like really experts on the topic. And then Toby is like, this is such a good opportunity for you to cream them with a joke and say that they have like a Farmville case because they focus mostly on agriculture and the agricultural subsidy point was only 1/4 of the motion. So I say it, the audience laughs, and I know, oh, okay, we've got it. No matter what responses they launch to us, we're at least third, they're fourth. And I can focus my extension on framing against opening, which gave me a lot of really good time to frame the case well and to just leisurely take out as much of opening's impact as I could, which ended up succeeding, and we advanced to the semifinal. So it's one of those things where like you just have to notice like what is the minimum amount I have to do to get the judges and get the audiences on my side. Before they even believe you're correct, they have to believe you're right. There's a subtle difference there, but they have to believe that you're in the right. So take these opportunities when you can. If somebody's being really mean, it's an opportunity to call them out and be like, why would you just be so mean? Like, this is a sport for fun. Or like if somebody raises a really lengthy, awful POI that's like just like them blathering about their case, you could respond to it with like the Chad yes or a Chad no, or you could just say like, I didn't hear a question there, and just totally own them. Like, having a sense for the showmanship of a round is just as important when it comes to, in the judge deliberation, what team do they think is out right away? You don't want to be that team, which means you have to avoid these pivots yourself, and you have to place pressure on other teams to be out of consideration. So have a sense for these pivots, especially as you're climbing through the ranks in skill. Okay, if everybody understands so far, please put just like, why don't you put a number that starts with the letter F? in the chat. And if you do have a question, then please ask the question. But otherwise, put a number that starts with the letter F. Yes. Okay. So no questions here. The final bit I want to discuss in this section is in Madrid 2023 semi, what pivot did we take advantage of? Every team was really competitive. So we noticed that opening opposition did not use the word dominate or dominance enough. So we were just like, let's make the case about dominance and then build some new premises off of that. And then when opening government gave the POI, right, they were like something about like, why don't we have a balance or something like that? And then I was like, or like research, right-wing research is also good, or something along those lines. And then I was like, oh, this is an opportunity to really talk about like what left-wing research is really good for, like who it caters to, etc. So that was an opportunity to extol the virtues of our impact, basically, and then distinguish ourselves in the extension. Yeah, aura farming. Pivots are basically aura farming. I guess you could say like it's like rep farming, but like I feel like it's a bit different if it's like accumulated in the round itself versus like resting on your laurels of past achievements. Thank you for sending that for. Agree, that is a number that starts with the letter F. Okay, so yeah, next up is after the finals. Okay, so there are three things you should do after the finals. First is you should take this opportunity to calibrate your sense of positioning, right? So all those things I asked you to do before, you will do them, and like half the time you'll be wrong, right? What matters is that you tried, and then when you get down from the stage, you ask, your buddies who are watching in the audience, or like, your contingent mates, your partner, hey, what did you guys think? Did you think that this point was winning, etc.? Did you think you were clear enough? And just ask. Like, it's just important to calibrate your sense. So, ask from a variety of people. You don't want to do it in like the annoying debate where you're like, oh, do you think we win? Did you think we win? Blah, 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 blah. You just ask what you thought. Ask what they thought was missing in the debate. If there was like a serious gap in the topic, it could have been discussed more. Like I said, if a finals is hard to practice because it's hard to get feedback, calibrate your sense of positioning. Get feedback your own way. Of course, the second thing to follow up is get feedback from the judges. Don't forget this. Once they announce the result, even if you lost and it sucks, get feedback. There is no excuse. If you think the judges are bad, you still have to win over bad judges. So you have to know how they think. So this is not an excuse. If you're tired, so are the judges. This is not an excuse. Get feedback the next day if you have to. Like I remember like Facebook messaging ending as like a scared 20-year-old after my first World Finals, because like obviously we got like in the end we got like beaten out in the direct response by Tin, right? So we were like Tin and Lover. So we were like, okay, so how could we have done it better? So I asked, I messaged all of the judges on Facebook. If I could get feedback from a million miles away during COVID, you can definitely do it if you're in the same hotel. It's a bit rude to do it like maybe while everybody's been drinking and it's like the finals party, but like just do it when you're like when you can, like don't forget to ask. The final thing is stay humble. If you made it to the final, that doesn't mean that you will make the finals again. It might even make it harder. If you won even, all that means that you won that tournament, not that you will be the best forever, nor that you will continue to win other tournaments. One of the big poisons to success for a career is you let the little tiniest bit of success get to your head. I don't know if you've listened to Toby's valedictory speech because he just gave it, but he gave a really good quote, which was like, addiction is really a drug. Audience's adulation is really a drug. Like success is super addicting. So you have to stay humble, because if you like apply all these tricks, learn a lot about debate, and then you stop at the first pre-UADC, first pre-EUDC because you're like, I've learned enough, you will never get to become great unless you're like an extreme one-of-a-kind prodigy. So you have to stay humble. You have to keep grinding, because typically in the lead up to the biggest final of your life will be several smaller finals you've had to overcome. You will look back at all the peaks you've conquered, and you realize you couldn't even see that high before, but now you've made it to the peak of the mountain. So you have to stay humble, because there are always higher peaks to climb. Even if you've won the world championship or whatever, there are other things in life that are bigger, more important, and still out there to be climbed. So you have to stay humble. You have to have a good attitude throughout all of it. Part of these, like, these points of feedback is to, like, to get humbled, right? Like, I remember losing recently I lost Southampton Open to, I think, Umar. And then I asked Russell to get feedback from the judges. Even if we lost, like, it's still important to get feedback. I thought Russell who was my partner, gave a very good speech. We still lost, right? And it's like, yeah, we lost. Am I embarrassed that I lost a round? Not really, because in the end, all you have is what you gave on the floor. So taking the train home, it's like, oh yeah, you should ask them for feedback. You should message them for feedback, because you have no excuse not to learn. So stay humble. Stay humble, because that's the only way to grow. It's acceptable to make mistakes and to be embarrassed and to take losses, as long as you're still growing. So never stop growing. You can only grow when you're humble. Yeah. Okay, so the question, do all of these metrics equally apply to online tournaments, considering we can't technically, or you can definitely aura farm in online tournaments. But what you're refining is not as much your body language as it is your eloquence, your language. I do remember a very particular pre-UADC, like in 2022, where the finals motion was basically like everything everywhere all at once. It's like, would you take the option to have this machine? And then the argument I gave was like I felt it was emotionally very compelling, and I didn't realize how compelling it was until after the round ended, when the judges opened their cameras and one of them was crying. So you can definitely aura farm. You can definitely make people feel things. Online tournaments are just a narrowing of that scope to how can I make people feel things through a screen where I can't shroud the room in my presence. It just means your words have to do the work. So like, think about how you can make your examples more vivid, more expressive, without being off-putting and too visceral. So like, in the everything everywhere all at once machine, you don't just have the opportunity to correct mistakes, but you have the opportunity to live through the versions of yourself you always wished you could be, to have been the good son that did forgive their father, to have been the person who lived up to the expectations of his wife and finally got that degree, finally got that promotion. If you have the chance to live through all of these things, it empowers you with a renewed sense to pursue your life now, because you know that if you could have been that other person, what's stopping you from being that person in this universe, today, tomorrow, the next 10 years? And it's a type of thing where, like, you have to trust your words. You have to deliver it earnestly. Which is another piece of feedback, by the way, which is the best way to take a finals loss is earnestly. Like, yeah, you did lose. You can say the judges were crap. You can say that you were cooked and the finals motion was imbalanced. But in the end, the reality is people will remember that you lost, and you have to accept that and get better, because otherwise you will never get better. Okay. So that's I gave a lot of examples already, actually. So I feel like it may be more suitable now for me to stop sharing. I think I've pretty much illustrated the points I wanted to talk about, unless people have any questions. So now is a good chance, like, maybe we can spend 10, 15 minutes for people to ask questions about finals, about like more practical tips you might have, you might want to ask about. But if not, then of course you're all free to live your lives. Now is probably when people would open their cameras and it can transition to a discussion rather than just being a lecture. Hello, Umar. I saw your face for the briefest moment. Are you still in the UK, or are you back in where are you working now? Oh, you're Sierra. That's so cool. Okay, at work. Okay, I'll be quiet. Okay, yeah. If anybody else has any questions, that's a good now's a good time to ask. Yeah.
I have a question, a bit different. From a judge's perspective, do you think that there's anything that they should necessarily do differently, or be vigilant against doing differently when they're judging finals?
Two things. The first thing is, nobody likes a panel hog. So you should try to keep your contributions to a very large, like, especially in like a panel of 5 to 7 people, keep it to like, what are you trying to say? What evidence are in the round are you citing? and what does this mean for the discussion. So it's like, let's say the discussion is like, oh, closing government beats closing opposition. Your claim is closing government does not beat closing opposition. Why? The argument that panelist member A is citing has already been said by opening government. It has been said significantly. Opening government said this, closing government said this. These are not very different. So they might have said something new, but not materially increasing the impact of what was already said. Therefore, closing government's material is derivative. Therefore, it cannot be used to weigh them against closing opposition. Therefore, they don't have this argument, and therefore they lose in the exchange, and panelist A might be right that if they did have it, they would win, but they don't have it, so they don't win. So that's the first thing. The second thing is take notes. Finals will typically have a very high density of material. The one thing you want to avoid is having a totally different call of the round. Like I remember in EFL finals of ABP, I was just so fried because my fingers were hurting and I was like taking as many notes as I could, but like I couldn't read my notes because they were like tough. And I had a pretty good recall of the round. So I was tracking some premises that other judges were not. But I had missed some of the premises that they were. So what ended up happening was like, I think it was like a 6-1 split where I was in the minority or something like that. Because I really disagreed on the interpretation of the round. I felt I had a very plain text interpretation of what the other team said. And even after hearing the premises of what everybody said, I still think that team won. But I definitely get why if people were tracking slightly different notes, it would totally change the call of the round because it was pretty close. So instead of thinking I need to cram everything into my head, think I need to cram everything into my notes and then afterwards recall it properly. It's unreasonable to expect an hour's worth of audio data in your head to be effectively retained and recalled. It's much easier to recall it from text. So write really good notes.
Good, thank you.
No worries. Oh, and don't fall asleep. That's super important. I've had judges fall asleep on me.
Hi, David. I have a question, if I may. Sorry for not being able to turn on the camera.
Yeah, that's fine. But somebody asked in the chat, so hold that question for a bit.
Okay.
They're slightly faster than you. How do you prevent the inferiority complex you may have when you know a far superior speaker is in the finals who has achieved more than you have? Probably. How do you prevent that cognitive bias, especially when it may bleed into your speech? Like, you're in that same final as them. So like right now, you're just as good as them. Maybe when the final's done, they're better than you. But you both have 7 minutes. I would say remind yourself of what makes you inspired about debate. Remind yourself that even that speaker still has heights to reach, things to do, people they wish that they were better than. So, you might have that bias inside, but the big thing is to never apologize for your speech. That's one thing that we always did in Ateneo High School. And like Ateneo, even in college, which is like, if somebody like, oh, sorry, that was such a bad speech, I would like scold them if I was a captain. Or like if I was a senior, I would be like, we don't do that. Never apologize for a speech you gave. So you have to practice the face or the performance of being somebody who has 100% belief in yourself, even if you don't actually do. Okay, sorry. First is Savior, then Abrar, then Huezen. Okay, Savior.
Yeah. So I kind of feel lazy to make a matter bank, right? So do you think everyone who goes to the World Final have one? And how much big difference does it make in terms of winning it?
I mean, some very good people don't have matter banks. The more important thing about a matter bank is that you have written it. It's actually quite inefficient to flip through it, to read up on it. Unless you already have it's like a fact you need to recall, like, what is the capital of Iran, or what are the names of the political parties of Turkey, etc. It's more important to just have written it. There are many people who succeed quite well without having a very deep knowledge of things in the world. There are people who succeed because they do so well at gathering information and using and squeezing every last bit of that. So, I was just hanging out with Karis recently, Karis and Max and Surdip. And then Karis was like, yeah, I've never done a matter file before. I've just been really good at taking the flow of the round. So, you practice different skills, I guess. And some of these may compensate for not matter banking. But I do think, though, if it for you is a matter of laziness, frankly, I do think at the end of your debate career, if somebody asks, why did you not achieve the goals you set out to achieve? And you're like, well, it's because I was lazy. If that explanation is sufficient for you, then by all means, you can live that life. However, I do think if it's just a matter of laziness, make things easy for yourself. Make it easy to write a brief by doing 1 page every day, and it will reach like 100 pages very quickly. Um, the thing that matters is that you know the work, you know the things you're reading up on, so that you don't have to actually flip through it once you're up on stage.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have another question, if I may.
Is it related?
Uh, Kind of. So, like, I remember
Okay.
there was a post on Debate Series posting about which research paper they should read, right? And I
Mhm.
remember Tejas and Ryan Lafferty posting bunch of research paper they have read and like how they have articulated their arguments in that. And like I
Sure.
remember you probably commented something like that. You should just listen and observe and something like very silly. So I was wondering
Yeah,
what you
the name
meant
of
by
the
that.
paper is called "Attention is All You Need."
Yeah, something like that. So like, do you like mind like elaborating like what how exactly you probably retain those information in the best possible way and that works for you or like worked for you in past?
I don't really use research papers to debate. I mean, I've always been in like research since undergrad. But sorry, I mentioned "Attention is All You Need" because that's like one of the most seminal machine learning papers of all time. It was like the key innovation for attention, which is the mechanism behind like GPT, like the GPT family of models. Because attention is a really powerful, like a really powerful architecture. So I don't think it's actually that useful for debate. I think maybe if you're in like a machine learning round, but I don't think it's super useful. I would say how do I get that information? I just like to read a lot of papers. I like look on Twitter for like papers that are like successful or that have recently been published. I'm on like a lot of AI research forums. I mean, my job next month is AI research as when I graduate from my master's. So I really like research. I like to read. I like subscribe to Deep Learning Weekly, which is a newsletter for deep learning. I also have like I subscribe to this other newsletter that's like it's called like Data is something. Not Data is Beautiful, but like there's this other newsletter that just like tells you about weird sources of data. That's pretty cool. I've never really used a research paper like cited a research paper in a debate speech. That comes off as like chat GPT-ish. I guess you if it's like a seminal concept, and you should be aware of it. Like, maybe you shouldn't have to read a research paper on like the cutting edge of like gender theory, but you should read up on the second sex. You should be familiar with like, Simone de Beauvoir. You should be familiar with like classical thought experiments to abortion and having a child, right? So it's less about reading research papers and more about having a sense of the field that the research paper would indirectly give you.
I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think computer science is pretty good for debate, as evidenced. I am doing computer science right now in Cambridge, and I did computer science in the Philippines, and math. Okay. Who else? Abrar. How to practice storytelling, and then afterwards it's Wezen. So Abrar, how to practice storytelling to connect with the audience and judges. Uh, Practice it in your normal debate rounds. Practice doing lovey-dovey relationship debate motions. Practice doing really big theory philosophy motions on like the kind like the veil of illusion or the veil of ignorance, etc. Uh, I would say also read not just like debate texts and like news, but like read fiction. Read things that really make you feel strongly and crib lines of phrase from them. Like I cribbed this line from like a tweet, which was like, um, when man built the library of Alexandria, when man burned down the library of Alexandria, we learned that there was one thing older than words, and that was fire, and there was one thing truer than wisdom, and that was ashes. Right? So something like that. And that came from a tweet. You can get things from anywhere. I read All the Light We Cannot See. That was a really good book. And that one was like, I thought like, when you talk about like the experiences in Nazi Germany, you can say like think about it from the experience of like a young blind French girl who's the main character of that book, or like I read When Breath Becomes Air, and then there's a really good, yeah, of course you've heard Russell use it because I was telling him about it. um, the dumb boy, uh, hardworking though. What was I gonna say? Sorry, dumb, not like intelligence, but dumb in like life choices. Um, Oh, and yeah, and when breath becomes air, like for example, you can use the quote like the word disaster, like literally dis, which means to pull apart, and aster, which means stars. And you never know what a disaster is like until you see it in the eyes of a child who's just lost their parents, and it feels like the stars are really coming apart in their eyes. So something like that, right? Like you could just crib cool lines of phrase. You can watch YouTube videos. That's how you practice storytelling. Is you become immersed in story. That's basically it. Okay, Huezen.
So my question is like, how do you calm down a teammate that is new to, like, completely new to reaching grants, knowing that you don't have that much time to comfort them, or like you're also in the same level of pressure as them, so like you're not in the position to take care of them that moment.
How do you calm down your partner?
Yeah.
Um, well, I've for a very long time I've been in the position where I was like the more senior one, right? Um, Sorry, when I recommend people get into debate, um, it depends on like what type of media they like. Like if they like movies, maybe I'll recommend like The Great Debater. If they like anime, I usually recommend Blue Lock and Haikyuu. There's a quote from Haikyuu that's really like, uh, it's like the sight of your back should be a source of inspiration to your teammate. Like if nothing else, you cannot be responsible for them to calm down, but you can at least have them be assured that you are reliable. So what you can do is be there. What you can do is firm yourself up. Of course, your responsibility is first to yourself. Um, but if you're really concerned about them, all you have to do is assure them that if they believe in you, that is all you need to get through that fight. Which is how I like to do things. You know, and when I was a junior, there were bits where like, for example, I was partnered with like two seniors, and they would like fight for like my first novice tournament with the university debate team in Ateneo. So one of them had already become best speaker of Asia. The other one was like a national champion at this point and like an Asian semifinalist. I think they had both broken at Worlds already. So this is Ignacio and Mika, and then they would like argue in prep. I would be like the first speaker in that team, and then they would argue like, no, David should have this as the second premise to the first argument. Like, no, that should be in the second argument's third conclusion. I would be like, what the heck, guys? So what do you do if everybody is like, if like the world is collapsing around you, your teammates are like, fighting or whatever? Of course they got over it, and then they were like, okay, you can handle this argument, I'll handle this argument. But in the end, all you have to do, if your partner is inconsolable, all you have to do is give so good of a speech that you inspire them to stand up. The sight of your back should be an inspiration to your teammate. And that's a good attitude, because it means that when you're like, you shouldn't be seeking for high speaks. You should be seeking to debate in a way that inspires the people around you, and especially the person who gets the closest view, which is your partner.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It seems like there are no other questions. I guess there's like a
I
question. Oh,
have
okay. Jeremy. Yeah.
I have one last question.
Hmm.
As someone who's had success relatively early on into entering the BP scene, what's your best advice in terms of like rapidly getting like to the quality of someone who'd reach all finals? Because I'm getting back in speaking next year, and like more than likely I'm going to be speaking with a novice because of like the pool that's available in my union. So what kind of like path do you think is best?
Yeah. I guess I was in like a adjacent situation. Like I suffered from success pretty early on. So like I was put into team A really quickly, and then we won Asians. And then afterwards I was like struggling to find my identity as a debater. In that same year, we ended up making the world final. And I mostly attribute that to, when you are just starting to get good, your main enemy is inconsistency, because you have already proven you are capable of giving a good debate speech. What you now have to do is to always give a good debate speech. Don't worry about giving a great debate speech, because those will come and those moments of brilliance will strike you. But whether or not you get to the semifinal stage to give a great speech on a motion you would have crushed requires you to debate in such a way that you don't cop a 74, or that you don't take a random fourth in round 3. So this means that you should grind IMO. Like, this is my opinion, so I wouldn't. Maybe some people are different. But so what I did between that UADC and the worlds of the next year was just like give 10 Gorillion speeches. I'd give like 3 debate speeches in the org room every day. I would listen to only debate in my free time. I would basically try the hyperbolic training chamber myself. Debate under constraints, debate under handicaps, debate in any spar rounds I could find, debate every weekend, every other weekend if uh, every weekend, maybe even twice a weekend if it was like a 1 day comp. Never double book. Um, if it was like a 1 day comp, I do 2 1 day comps. Because when you're at the curve, when you're just about to scale up, you cannot let yourself get stuck into a valley or a bad minima where you've become pleased with your growth and you decide this is it. You have to always feel like you're drowning a little bit when you're just starting to get good, so that you can skip past that plateau and just start to be great already. So you have to get good slowly, then all of a sudden, which means you have to grind out as many rounds as you can in as many different situations, positions, team ups, tournaments, circuits, etc. Focus on building a broad, good foundation if you've already proven yourself that you can give a good speech. How do you break that inconsistency? Because no matter how many spars I do, semifinals is just where it ends. That seems pretty consistent to be fair. Um, I would say focus on building up to a higher foundation, which means maybe spar with people who are better than you, who can teach you things, watch debate speeches of people that inspire you, go to tournaments where you don't even break at all. Maybe you're debating in too easy of a circuit, or maybe in too easy of a tournament, and the opportunities are out there like need to be harder so that you don't even break this time, or you only get the quarters. If you're plateauing at semis, it's a sign that um, you're not having the stimulus you need to reach finals. So somebody asked how to get into Cambridge. I got pretty good grades in my master's, and I published a research paper before I graduated. That's pretty good. And then that's good to get past the interview screen, to get past the resume screen. But you have to crush the interview, so you have to like work on your interview skills. Oh, it's also expensive, so try and get a scholarship. Okay, any other questions, ladies and gents? If not, I'm gonna go for lunch.